All right, we'll go ahead and do the roll. For everyone's information, we are recording this meeting, which will be posted on the Commission's YouTube page after the meeting. If you are not an official member, please put your name and affiliation in the chat so we can record that for the meeting notes. We'll run down the list. Senator Hettleman. Senator Watson. Delegate Frazier Hidalgo. Delegate Allen. Rachel Jones. Maryland Department of Ag. All right, I am here. Kim with the Comptroller's Office.
I am here. I do have to log off for a little bit, but I have someone covering for me.
Thank you. Amanda Hine.
I'm here, Ben.
Thank you. Diego with MEA. Do I have a representative from MEA who's covering for Diego? MEA. Scott Wilson. Scott.
Sure.
Thank you. Paul Perchinsky.
I'm here.
Josh Cohen.
Here.
Thank you. Matt Chen.
Here.
All right, we got 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Checking to make sure we have quorum. I think we do. All right, we do technically have quorum. All right, we'll go ahead and proceed. Let's see here. All right, so thank you for everyone calling in. Today, our goal is at the end of this to have what I would call a draft, like a full draft of the topics for the members to take back and to beat around the edges and say if you can support it, if you can't support it, yes, no. Where we're at in the process is that I'm going to be drafting the report up. And if in the next meeting or two we can come to consensus on items, great. And if we can't, I will also note that. So nothing that you say yes or no to today is final, but I do need us to start putting foot down on issues and really only having 1 or 2 options for members to think about and then break or say yes to at a later date. I am going to flip around the schedule a little bit from where we were. I am going to go back to the framework first and then go into the detailed issues. I was talking with some members, and I think it would be useful to, when this goes back, that some of these big items, most particularly the who's under the framework and the enforcement, especially for state agencies trying to come up with their budgets, would be important. So that's where we're going to run down. In terms of starting, you should all have the Word document and the Excel document I circulated. I'll be starting with that Word document. And I also this time made sure to circulate that to everyone who is attending, not just the official members. And I'll be sharing my screen. Let's see what else. So we'll be diving through that Word document. I will probably actually focus primarily upon who's under and then enforcement, and then we can go through the other items. Before we jump into that, state agencies, budgets, I just want to get a rundown on where you all stand on coming up with your budgets for if you were asked to do this for, and I say if you were asked to, worst case, oversee uptime and reliability for all public EVSE charging, and this would be public-facing EVSE charging, so the numbers that I put forward in this document a little while ago. I know I had some feedback from MDOT asking to solidify a couple things here as a group before they came up with that number. So just let me know where you're at, and then what you think you need decided before you can give us the final numbers, so we can decide which state agency, or we can make a recommendation regarding state agencies. So I will start with the PSC. We are still under development. Our technical staff is working through it. I haven't received anything from our technical staff, but Drew or others from tech staff, if you want to speak up right now, if there's something specific you need to hear from this group today, please let me know.
No, I don't think so. We're still crunching some numbers. We'll
All right, okay. MDOT, you're next.
Yeah, we're working on it. We have, I think we'll probably just use this template that we use for fiscal impact that we normally use for the legislative session, and knowing that we're anticipating worst case in order to shape the budget helps, and we'll just see what also comes out of today's conversation to factor in.
Thank you. All right, let's see, Comptroller's Office.
So far, we're not thinking there'll be much to be asking for budget-wise.
Okay, so if the legislature said you're in charge of overseeing all uptime and reliability, you don't think you'd have much of a budget?
Oh, okay. I understand what you're asking.
Yeah.
We'll have to take
but
yeah,
if you had to continue doing your job, you don't need much of a budget, is what you're saying.
that's it.
Yeah, but yeah, we do need the second question also answered. If you need to talk with me offline about that, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Did somebody from MEA join the call? All right. We do not have a member from MEA to ask that of. And then Rachel, or I know Allison can't make it. Rachel said she could at some point, but she's not here either. All right. So that's where the state agencies are. That number, really, we do need to kind of have a good working draft of that, even if you're still tinkering around the edges, within about 2 weeks. So everyone keep working through that. If there's things you need from this group, please email it so that we can work through that. Or call me and I'm happy to talk through it. One other administrative thing before we dive into the Word document. I did put an optional hour on this meeting, understanding that I'm trying to get that report written up and that we have a month and a half left before the report would need to be filed. And so around 2:45, I'm going to see where we are at with our discussions. We are still having useful, productive discussions. I will ask the members if they are willing to keep meeting past 3 p.m. If the majority are not willing to keep meeting past 3 p.m., then we'll stop the meeting at 3. But my recommendation is that we really do try to hit all the points today, so that I can get you a revised straw man document and Excel document for you all to say thumbs up, thumbs down, or change this to. All right. With that, I will go ahead and share my screen. Any questions? Yeah. All right, so we have been through this document a couple times. How I've re-edited the document since the last time you all had an opportunity to look at it was I took the general comments I had received from all members, including Blink is now included in this, and made sure their comments was either captured in the margin or below any sort of revised recommendations. I then went through and tried to rewrite possible definition or I guess statements for you all to work with, and then highlighted those in yellow in terms of what we'll be working from. So the two that I said we would focus on are who is subject and enforcement, because then I think that kind of feeds into a lot of other things. And I'm going to really do most of this from the enforcement section, which is on pages 8 and 9 of the document. And so if I was to break this into a hierarchy, I would say where the membership has been in our pretty much all of our meetings is that everyone thinks that there needs to be some oversight, some view of most public facing EVSE chargers. The issue is what does that mean? Does that mean that the implementing agency, when we're talking about uptime and reliability, this is focused exclusively on uptime and reliability, would basically have the ability to bring negative actions or penalties against EVSE that does not meet the standards? Or do we take a tiered approach whereby some EVSE face negatives and some maybe report, and some or some EVSE face negative financial penalties and some do not face anything? If we were to look at other markets, or I would say not markets, but other regulatory implementations within the United States on this, probably the closest right now is California, whereby if you are receiving state funding, ratepayer funding, your charging station is subject to uptime, or they're planning to pass regulations, I should say, that you're subject to uptime and reliability reporting. And that they were going to track that and then over time continue to make recommendations to the legislature regarding those issues. So that is probably the most forward model we have in the United States, with a couple other pieces of information being reported in other states. So it's such that the comptroller's office has the ability to appropriately tax everyone. So I think what we probably need to work through here is we need to decide, is everyone going to be under this framework, or only, or when I say everyone, like, is everyone going to be subject to that financial discussion, or only a partial group? Because that then leads to this hierarchy of possible outcomes. So I want to start there in terms of option one on the screen. I think we've heard from Paul, Mr. Verchinsky, where it's basically everyone should be there. I have fallen in the camp of more or less not everyone should be there. I think it's time to hear, I guess, before I go to the other members, Paul, I'm going to do kind of a round the table, like, interaction with the members to see where you all fall at this moment, or what questions you want answered. So Paul, I'll start with you, since I think I know where you are.
Yeah, what we're asking is basically to get a reliable system up. And having worked in both the public and private sectors, the only thing that the private sector seems to understand is financial penalties. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. It's based on my experience and wanting a good consumer experience. I might note that this is skipping a little bit forward, but 2 and 3, you're talking about shoulds. Also in 1, I think all those shoulds need to be changed to a shall, particularly because we're recommending legislation. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I had 2 thoughts. First of all, EVSE provided public funds. So let's say that they took an incentive from the state. Is that public funding? I would say yes. So if they've had an incentive from, like, MDE, for example, then I think that would qualify as having taken public funds. The second thought is I would make the boundary if the EVSE charges money, because that would make it a lot easier for weights and measures to handle, because any EVSE that charges money is under their jurisdiction. So the only ones then that would not be under this scope would be free chargers, where it's they're not charging money and paid for. Well, I would say free chargers, or chargers where it was completely done with no incentives.
Yeah,
But I guess no, because then, yeah, if it was done with no incentives but they're still charging money, it would still be within the scope of what's covered.
So
Yeah,
Scott,
I
before
would,
go ahead, Paul.
yeah, I would kind of agree with that. One of the things that I tried to do was to put in a definition for publicly funded chargers because we don't have that, if I remember right. And I took a stab at it. I don't know whether it's broad enough or not. But I mean, we get a public report now already from the utilities. I mean, that's kind of a done deal. So, but I agree with the tag on. If anybody's getting financial benefit, then that's quote unquote a public charger where they're being charged for it, except in certain circumstances.
So before I hop into the definition of public, I guess like receiving public funds, which I think would definitely include incentives from the state, and I think we could make arguments for ratepayer funding. That's what that's what they do in California, or they're planning to do in California, and maybe that's the note that Matt just dropped in the chat. Haven't had a chance to look at it, but before I dive into that, Scott, are you? I guess you have been previously a proponent of a tiered approach for those who are receiving, who would be receiving, I would say, some sort of extra funding outside of their business versus, I'm not going to go to say private business, but you were definitely thinking about MUDs and others. So I guess, because right now I'm trying to figure out, are we dealing in an absolute or are we dealing in shades of gray in terms of the enforcement? So are you of the opinion that if you are receiving, or if you qualify under the weights and measures definition, which is basically you are receiving financial compensation, or that you engage in financial transactions, I should say, with somebody who's not yourself, that the implementing agency should have enforcement authority against you that encompasses fines and penalties? Or do you think that I should differentiate between the charging stations at that point, such as those who have received the public funding should definitely have it, but everyone else has something less than that, or faces something less than that is not an actual fine, but maybe there's a letter, slap on the wrist, and or just reporting to track what's going on?
Well, yeah, and enforcement is a lot of shades of gray. Yeah, so enforcement is calibrated. So you would start soft, but then it would ratchet up for chronic, non-functioning. Now MUDs are going to have to be handled separately because they're kind of semi-public and they may have gotten a grant. I mean, the MUDs are supposed to be a simulation of home charging for people living in under MUDs. So, but they're managed not by the individual, but by the property, the HOA. So they're going to have to be handled separately. But I would, I would make what's covered under this fairly broad. So yeah, if you're financially compensated, then you're covered, and if you got even a grant or an incentive from the state, then you're covered.
But you would, so let's say, Scott, so it seems like you would say MUD, maybe they don't face financial penalties. If they, over time, if they have inoperable, or would you say the MUDs would face it if they have inoperability problems in the long run? This is talking
Well,
about if somebody
that's
creates legislation, the implementing agency is going to need legislative guidance. So is there a line in the sand
right.
on where they can go?
But no, that's to be determined later. So what form the enforcement takes is what's going to be calibrated. So that's that would have to be determined later. So I'm not saying financial penalties. There might be some of those, yeah. But the question is simply, do they have some sort of oversight? Is there some sort of enforcement,
I
be it
think I've taken
soft
it
or
past.
hard?
I should say I've taken it past should there be some form of oversight? I think the group generally agrees there should be some form of oversight for everything that's publicly facing.
Okay, yeah.
What that means, I think, is wildly different. And so I think I'm trying to get to the what does that mean via the enforcement question.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the beginning, when this new regime is implemented, there's going to, we need to take some calibration data. So there's going to be a kind of a grace period, if you will. So let's say 6 months, and then okay, your charger has had reports. Now I've had thoughts about what the person, what the group installing the charger should be required to do. But then if so, in the beginning, we're going to help figure out what the problem is. Is there a problem with your charger? Let's figure out a plan to address that problem. Tell us how you're going to address that problem. Is there an identifiable problem that you can fix? Let us know if you followed through on that and what the result is. And then then the station will be tested, and if it's working, then great, we've solved the problem. So now if it's hasn't been, if it's not working for like 6 months or 9 months, and it's like, well, yeah, we're working on it. Well, tell us what the problem is. Well, we're figuring that out. And if it's been 6 months or 9 months, then you could be looking at fines or something.
Okay. Sounds good. Allison and Drew.
Hello, everyone. Just to address a few of Scott's comments, currently Weights and Measures already has requirements for registered service agencies. We would follow the same requirements uniformly throughout the different programs that we currently oversee. So registered service agencies, meaning agencies that are involved with the original installation as well as repair work and returning devices back into service after they're repaired. We do oversee, we will be licensing them in the upcoming months. We're tentatively looking at January 1st start date to register these service agencies, and we already have parameters and requirements. And if it is decided upon that we are the implementing agency, either way, we're going to oversee the registered service agencies because that's already within our parameters of our program. Additionally, we already have parameters set forth in our statute for repair of devices. So it would not go on 6 months or 8 months or 9 months. There's already parameters set forth in statute for the timeline that these devices are required to be repaired, removed, or replaced. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. I should just re-note that the discussion we're having here is related to uptime and reliability. So slightly different than what's currently under your jurisdiction.
Understood, and I do apologize. I hopped in late due to my travel.
Nope, no apologies. It's good to remind everyone. Drew.
Yeah, so that actually gets to my, I guess, question / comment. I mean, I can discuss my opinion on which one of these we should, 1, 2, 3, or 4 we should cover. But yes, because Scott brought up that Weights and Measures, they check everybody that charges any fee. So, we should include everybody that charges any fee. But we're talking about two different things. I just want to clarify. We're talking about reliability uptime, which is above and beyond Weights and Measures current practice of just, checking that a kilowatt hour is a kilowatt hour and that kind of thing.
Correct. We are talking above and beyond that.
Okay. Yeah. Just wanted to clarify. Yeah. So I'll just say for technical staff, we're not a fan of option 1. That would just be tens of thousands of chargers. Going back to the budget, I mean, we'd have to create a whole new division. At least I don't even know how many employees. We've heard from our meter people, they can only check about 20 to 30 meters a day. So checking, that many charging stations a day obviously isn't going to cover much of the state. But yeah, that's why we kind of like the idea of either ratepayer funded and or state funded chargers being looked at. So yeah, that could be anything from MEA grants to, like I said, ratepayer dollars, even federal funding. Yeah, any kind of funding outside, if they received any kind of assistance, like you could argue came from taxpayers or ratepayers, we're fine with looking at those or being a little tougher on those charging stations. But yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not an attorney, but I think it's into like jurisdictional issues. I mean, these folks are free to not, put up charging stations if they don't want to. So I just a little hesitant about, having these stringent regulations on all of them. You could also, deter the market from developing if you create too stringent of, policies on all EV chargers. So, yeah, my 2 cents.
Well, but the thing is, as far as reliability reporting, I actually have a hypothesized model for how that would work. And so weights and measures is inspecting them proactively. Now, yes, it's at a certain, you know, percentage and like sampling and whatnot. That's fine. But as far as reliability reporting, that would be sourced from calls, customer complaints, if you will, or let's just say calls. So the person would go up, try to charge the car, it's not working. So then if they call the 800 number and if they can be rebooted or whatnot, that's fine. Then there's no problem. But if they call and report an issue, as I've stated elsewhere under other work groups, now a clock has started. So that is now, see, the important thing for reliability reporting is T is the outage time and the excluded time. So the outage time has now started. Now, if it can be shown later that that's an excluded reason, of which there's 6 allowed under NEVI, and there might be more that Maryland allows, then that would not count towards the uptime requirement. Because if it's an excluded time, then it's not included in those minutes, and of which you get 11 days per year. So, but now the outage time is that clock is running until it's repaired. That outage clock is still running. So if the next person comes up and charges at the charger, it's still not working, and that's what's going to go into the uptime measurement. So the 97%, which is the goal. So that's different than proactively inspecting the chargers, which weights and measures is going to be doing, the way I understand.
All right. Let's see, which state? MDOT.
Yeah, I would also just, after Scott Wilson's point, agree with that was my understanding of how whichever state agency overseeing reliability would go about sort of monitoring uptime is based on consumer complaints and data reporting, depending on which charging stations end up being subject to data reporting. I'm still conferring with my team on where we land ultimately on 1, 2 versus 3. Initially, it came heavy-handed at 1. I think at the baseline, we will say 3. And in agreement with a tiered approach in terms of warning before any actual penalties. I would also agree with, I think, Paul Virginski's point in we need to define public facing versus public funded. I think that would help a lot in which kind of charging stations we're talking about.
Give me one second. You know, it's 3. I definitely spelled tier 2 different ways. tired. The tiring approach which we are taking. All right. Got that, Amanda. So you're still deciding, but you would support a tiered approach. And I do agree we need to draw a distinction between public facing versus public funded. So let's hop into that in a minute. Let's hear from the others and then we will do that. Let's see. Matt, Jen, Blink.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, so I mean, I think we're sticking kind of with our original thoughts here, which is that subject to the definition of public facing versus public funded, you know, option 3 is the most feasible for the industry in its current stage of development, you know, to support. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Josh. Switch.
Thanks. I also generally support option 3 as being most feasible for the industry. I do think it is appropriate if there are public dollars as a carrot to try and encourage more publicly available charging to be deployed, that those public dollars have conditions associated with them. And if the recipient is unable to meet those conditions, for example, 97% uptime, then there should be some sort of financial consequence, even if that is just a remediation period to try and get it in order, and then if not, something that's worked out in the contract. So I think that's certainly appropriate for public dollars. For the non-publicly funded, I think we're at this well, obviously we're at this like interesting state of the industry or stage of the industry that's very like transitional. And so just as an example, right now installing chargers is voluntary. So I agree with a lot of my industry colleagues who've said, like, if the state tries to impose mandatory requirements for privately funded chargers, that will significantly hurt sales. Like, it'll work against all of our collective goals to get more chargers installed. So in that sense, if we can simply get data, recognizing that this is a transitional stage of the industry, and then continue to review it and like figure out how to address challenges collectively, I think that would be a great outcome. Having said that, like just looking ahead to next year as a what if the legislature enacts EV ready building construction codes that include a percentage of required EV charging stations to be installed. So like, that's not the state of the market today. That does not apply in Maryland, but like looking ahead, what if the legislature does that? Then I'm sure the legislature would want those chargers to have some expectation of uptime, just as all drivers would. And so I use that as an example to say that I don't know the answer today. I do think it is appropriate for us as this work group to come back with an aspirational recommendation of saying we want all publicly available chargers to reach this uptime. But like, we just need to come back and like see where things stand a year from now and see where things stand a couple years from now. And I don't want my friends on the call who are advocates for reliability to feel like, oh, there's the industry just stonewalling and dragging its feet. I mean, it's really based in real concerns that too heavy-handed an approach will just, work against what we're all trying to do. So that's a longish explanation why I think 3 is the right approach. Thanks.
And then both Josh and Matt, I mean, this is the, I guess, a little bit of pushback, or for you to maybe help explain some, like, I understand why from an option 1, why the industry would not like that. And but option 2, where it's saying, hey, let's try and get data. Is there like for this monitoring thing, right? Is there a way? I get that, like if I'm talking about the mom and pop shop that is just sitting there with a level 2 charger sitting in front of their grocery store or whatever business they have, and they were doing it as a commodity, that maybe like I can see how that's burdensome. But let's say I'm talking about the networks and I'm talking about the blink switching. Is this something where maybe we look at other areas within the EVSE food chain to try and get an idea of how things are performing and have reporting at that level? I'm not sure. I'm just trying to figure out, like, there is this pushback on not just financial penalties, but also just reporting in terms of trying to see where things stand. So trying to understand, is there an acceptable level to the industry? And maybe there's not, but it would be good to hear from you all. And I have maybe after I go through all the remaining members, maybe I'll open that question up to the floor. But for you two as the official members, what are your thoughts?
I can just so just from the switch perspective, like in terms of chargers we install software-enabled networked chargers. So data reporting is not an issue for any chargers on our network. It's really just a question of our customer, like what are they comfortable sharing? And so would a customer even be comfortable sharing uptime data publicly? I don't know the answer to that. I think from the public policy standpoint, like for our purposes, if we can distinguish between anonymized data, right? I think that would be one thing, where if we say, hey, customer, the state has this requirement that for publicly available chargers, it wants to know uptime and availability, and it'll be confidential, et cetera. Like, I think that would be relatively acceptable. I do think certain customers would, I know some customers are going to be reluctant to share too much data for their privately installed chargers. So, and other, yeah, I do want to hear from other EV charging companies who focus even more on publicly available chargers than Switch does. But to your point, Ben, I mean, I'm answering for Switch, which is a software-based company. Like if a shopping center wanted to install a number of non-networked chargers, like that's a whole different challenge when it comes to even assuming they were willing to share uptime. Like, how would they report that in a way that was usable? I don't know.
Thanks, Josh. Scott, go ahead. And then I might ask one or two of the EVSEs. Anthony with Electrify America, you might be a good one to kind of weigh in there, because I think you guys do a lot of publicly available chargers. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with Josh. I mean, if yeah, we have to be careful we don't kind of scare people away from putting in chargers. So I absolutely agree with that. But so the reporting, yeah, if I mean the utilities are a special case, so I think that they should be required to list reports of outages, so that I should be able to take that report and recreate their claimed uptime number from that. But yes, private businesses and Josh's clients, that's fine. If they don't want to report the details, that's a separate discussion. But one thing is, I think that they should, part of the reporting should be a statement when you install the charger, what is my O&M going to look like? So if it's a charge point charger, have I bought the service contract from ChargePoint? Or if it was put in by an electrician, you should be required to make a statement. The electrician will be called if for service issues, because that at least gets it into the conversation. And then if they've made that statement, at least somebody's been looking at it, so that you don't have chargers that's like they have to recreate the service from from nothing when they get a complaint. It's like, oh, well, okay, I guess we better call an electrician. They need to kind of state that up front. What is that O&M going to look like? I think that that's a perfectly reasonable part of the reporting.
Thank you, Scott. All right, so I will go. Caitlin, go with EV Go. Anthony with Electrify America, and then Danny, I will let you weigh in if you think that they haven't said something that you would say. Y'all can try and keep it to 2 to 5 minutes as a group. That would be great. But yeah, make sure the group understands. Go for it. Caitlin, you're first.
I think starting off, some of the discussions that I've already mentioned in our industry presentation is that what is being considered as reliability and uptime is not exactly a panacea for all the issues that charging stations face, including some of the stories that Paul has brought up. But ultimately, this is a market issue, and with market competitiveness, we will be incentivized to provide better charging experiences. And, also to point out, Maryland is already a difficult market with no demand charge alternative rates. There's a utility owned and operated stations. So I think I'd be hesitant to provide any stringent penalties that will continue to disincentivize the market development. And in terms of reliability framework and reporting, California is still developing its own framework. So I do think it is premature for Maryland to do the same. Now, I think it's possible to put in some language to see how it develops and then reevaluate it. But I would caution against, doing anything that might contradict what other states are doing as well. And in terms of just reporting when it comes to our different partners, there's a lot of sensitive commercial information there, and doing those contracts would be really difficult. So just wanted to kind of provide that perspective, and happy to let others weigh in as well.
Thank you, Caitlin. Anthony, Electrify America, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, sure. I'll be brief. I'd echo everything Caitlin just said. I'd also add that any sort of penalties, reporting requirements, those each act as sort of dings against the state or any jurisdiction when we're looking at places, looking for good opportunities to site new chargers. So when we look at states, when we look at utility service areas, we're looking for like a regulatory environment on both the utility side and the lawmaker side that works, and a framework with reporting requirements and penalties that just increases the risks associated with building a charger in the state that's looking to adopt these requirements, and thus makes it a less attractive location to build, and we might go elsewhere.
Thank you. All right, Danny with Flow, go ahead and finish out from the industry, and then I'm going to hit up the other members that haven't spoken to this issue yet.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate the opportunity to provide some feedback here. Generally, Flow, and for those not familiar with us, we manufacture and provide network operations for EV chargers of all market segments. We would be in the camp of option number 3, and so in agreement with what Matt and Josh have stated. However, I would add one small wrinkle to that, which is instead of pursuing financial penalties, either through fines or the clawing back of public incentives already provided, and this is with the presumption that uptime standards would only apply to publicly funded chargers. We would not see anything providing rationale that privately funded chargers should be subject to uptime standards established at the state level if they have not received public funds. But we would like to see, instead of there being financial penalties, we would like to see a reevaluation of EVSE eligibility for public incentives. So what that would mean is if you are given, if you are alerted as a network operator with a public station on your network, that it is inoperable. You'd be given a sufficient period of time to address that, to get the station working again. However many warnings you are given, we would leave that to your discretion. However, if remediation is not handled within a reasonable period of time after several warnings, we would highly encourage you guys to be assessing eligibility of those network operators. So let's just say there's 3 warnings given for a station that's been inoperable for some period of time. In the future, that's company would no longer be eligible for incentives, whether they're through MEA, MDE, MDOT, whatever it might be. That would be our preferred method here.
Thank you, Danny. All right. I have not heard from the comptroller's office. Well, let me check the MDA, and I believe there is a representative for Senator Hettleman on the call. So go comptroller, MDA, and then Maura, I'll finish with you.
Thanks, Ben. This is Kim from the comptroller's office. A lot of really great conversation, and it's got me thinking and rethinking, and I don't think at this time I really can decide. So I will probably go with the consensus of the state agencies in general. Going forward for the rest of this meeting, I'll need to leave, and if you had more questions or votes that need to be taken, you'll have to send that to me at a later time. And I'll try to hop back on after I'm done with my next meeting. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks.
All right. Rachel, Department of Ag. This is for uptime and reliability.
Sure, thanks, Ben. I think Allison said it best earlier. We'll certainly defer to whatever the result of the work group is. But Allison, did you have any additions here?
Not currently with uptime. I don't want to speak for uptime just because that typically doesn't fall under the parameters of weights and measures.
Agreed. So then no additional input there from MDA, Ben.
Thank you. All right. Laura, you would like to weigh in for the senator if you are able to today, or if there's any feedback you want to give.
Yeah, I'm taking some notes, and I will definitely refer her to the YouTube video as well as my notes. But I don't want to weigh in for her as yet. I've been texting back and forth with her, but without her being able to listen to the whole conversation, I don't want to speak for her. But thank you.
Okay. Yep. Just wanted to check. And if there's questions you have, please ping me. I'm also happy to talk afterwards. All right. So we're going to put a pin in. I'm going to come back to this probably in 10 minutes, but I'm going to put a pin in it for now. Let's go really quick to the definition of publicly available versus publicly funded. And we will start with Paul Verchinsky's note in here. Give me 1 second. Let me make sure I've got it. Paul, is this what I have on the screen highlighted, is that the appropriate definition that you were thinking?
Yeah, that's what I took a stab at. Others may have additional items or not, or maybe want it constrained, but that's what I was thinking of at the time.
All right.
What page are you on, Ben?
Let me go back down. His definition is on page 5 of the document. I guess I'll leave it there for now. I was going to move it up to the top, but we can work from there. So publicly available versus publicly facing. So I think publicly facing, Paul has captured it pretty well, which is public is defined as an individual who can utilize the EVSE, privately owned, not for public use, which is fleets, the HOAs, and free. So basically, this is the financial transaction group that MDA oversees. So I guess the universe of those we are looking at is those who would also fall under weights and measures definition, which is basically they charge there's a financial transaction Weights and Measures is going to be there. Therefore, we also encompass that in terms of universally all publicly facing. This is not just, this is publicly facing, public available. This isn't publicly funded. Is that where we want to fall on this? I think that is a good, in terms of keeping it clean and trying to minimize the amount of discrepancy amongst what we are looking at. That might be the easiest in terms of publicly facing. This isn't talking about a subset yet. This should be kind of the universe of people that could or could not be addressed. I'll start with you. Unless you guys are off mute.
No, that, like I said, that was my shot at taking that, and I'd be open to any modifications or what other people are thinking. But I've done definitions before, and I try to keep it following my KISS principle.
That's a good principle to hold. Members, anyone want to what? That is publicly facing. Go ahead, Allison.
So in weights and measures, the way we define it wouldn't exactly be publicly facing. The wording that we use is any device, in this case, that would be the EV charger, that can be initiated and used in a consumer transaction, is how we define what would be public facing. So if there is a transaction that involves money, then that would fall underneath that particular parameter. But anything that can be used in a consumer transaction, essentially, a direct consumer transaction, is how we define what is registered in our department.
Hey, Allison, this is Amanda from MDOT. Can I ask a clarification? So based on that definition, would MDA consider mud charging or workplace charging that charges a fee to use as under that definition?
I'd have to look at that. I'm not gonna cross into that, just because if it's some sort of like contract agreement to work there, then we would not touch that. That would be a contract between the employee and their workplace. Anything that would be some form of contract outside of walking up and initiating the transaction, say with a credit card and app, some typical way, and then you're being charged by kilowatt hour. If it's some sort of contract agreement, let's say at a parking complex in an apartment or at a place of work, then weights and measures would not be part of it, especially if it's some form of employment terms.
Gotcha. Yeah, Ben, I mean, MDOT thus far in this work group has considered mud charging and workplace charging as semi-public, but ultimately under public. I see Matt Chen has been putting California's definitions under, and I saw that California considers those two groups as shared private charging.
And that
Amanda,
makes sense.
So Amanda, let me make sure I got that right. Workplace.
Mm-hmm. And mud charging.
And mud are considered semi-public, right?
By MDOT, yes. Semi-public, yeah. I think by having that definition, we're trying to have those charging stations be encompassed in whatever regulations are in place to also make sure that the charging experience for those users are covered.
Right. So, but those two, because they're charging the individual, it's basically, there is a consumer transaction because somebody who is not the owner of the equipment plugged in, used their credit card or something to give money. So therefore MDOT has their hand on them. We might tier uptime and reliability different, and therefore they might receive different treatment, but would you say that they are public, that they are still public effectively, or no?
I would say yes.
Okay, got it. All right, Matt,
And
go ahead.
I would,
Oh, go ahead,
sorry,
Amanda.
one more thing. I would just acknowledge that we know that that it would be a little bit tricky based on accessing those stations. So those are things that I'd want to confer with my group about how to approach a tiered approach. That's it for me.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda. Matt?
Agreed. And I think again with what California calls shared private chargers, you have to consider like they might only be accessible to the public for, then part of the day, and they could easily then be eligible to be under the potential regulations, but we'd have to keep in mind that, they have limited availability. I think the other thing about the definition that we just to do for consistency is define publicly available charger rather than say define as any individual, because the next sentence talks about privately owned ESV. So again, I think we just need to align our language as we go forward.
No, agree with that. So I think when we're talking about the universe of chargers, let me try. Public. Give me 1 second, sorry. See. All right. All right, and now let's get into the second. So this is my current, so we're talking about the whole universe of things that we've been talking about. I guess the strong, the doc, I'm sorry. Here's what I'm putting forward for you all, which is basically a mashup of Paul and Matt of California, which is basically the California, but the discussion about a direct consumer transaction, which would come from weights and measures. In terms of subcategories, we have semi-public, we have utility owned, we have publicly funded that we're about to run through, and then we would have exempt. That was written down here. This would be new, not on the sheets you currently have. I'll choose a different color. That blue's. I guess yellow is the best color to use. All right. All righty. For publicly funded, I would say based off of what we've all, and this would also align with things I've seen out of California in terms of when we're talking about the group, this would be financial, federal, state, local, and ratepayer financial compensation for installing and or operating the charger. And firm that up, but anyone have an issue with that as your publicly funded definition?
You could put including incentives. I mean, it's like grants or incentives. I mean, grants are kind of assumed, so it would be including incentives.
Yeah, give me a, okay, yeah, let me flip the thing, received financial. Received financial compensation, install. Charger, this includes, okay, grants. Funding. All right, Scott, I flipped it around kind of as you recommended and try to include that idea of grants as an example.
Yeah, grants or funding from federal, state, and local government. So that would be the incentives category.
Yeah.
So yeah, that looks fine.
All right.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on Scott's comment. I think instead of saying received financial compensation, I would say received financial incentives. But then you might get into an issue of what do you mean by incentives?
Well,
You
at the
have
end
to
of
weigh.
the, yeah, I don't think, go ahead, Paul, sorry.
And I don't know, I guess I'm coming back to compensation, although you have, you're talking about any incentives for the hardware, the software.
Well, you could
And
say received financial assistance.
yeah, you could do that.
Because the second sentence is meant to cover grants or incentives, to expand
Right,
on it.
right.
Yeah, I would. This is Amanda from MDOT. I would chime in here. I don't know if I have super nitpicky thoughts on incentives versus assistance or whatever, but I would think that NEVI funding I wouldn't consider that as an incentive per se because it's a contract with the state.
I'm going to put compensation back in, and then obviously this is going out to you all, so decide what you think best captures this. But I think you generally get the idea, which is somebody gave you money to put that piece of equipment in the ground. That's not your business. I think we should write a law that says that exactly. All right.
Or to continue operation and maintenance over time. I mean, it could be a smorgasbord of incentives that people get, and they could change over time. Where you know, we people are putting them in, but we're saying, well, you know, we want to make sure they're up for 5 years, so we're going to give you an incentive to make sure it's on the network and it stays up.
Right. Well, and Paul, that's why I have in here operating the charger. So if you get an incentive either to put the steel on the ground or let's say somebody gave you financial compensation to maintain it. All right. Any heartburn over what is written on the screen right now for publicly facing, publicly funded? We can definitely
I was going to
define
point
it.
out earlier that I did like that California definition of, I mean, we're calling it semi-public. They call it shared private. So shared private chargers designated to be available to certain categories of users, for example, employees or tenants or visitors or residents.
If somebody could drop that into the chat, I can paste it in. I guess I'm looking at you, Matt. Sorry, I know you just have the document up somewhere.
Do you care about lease versus owned or different options, payment options from the loans as well?
Go ahead, sorry, Diego, you cut out there for me.
Oh no, it's I guess it's just limited to grants or other funding options. I don't know if you're nitpicking there.
I would say it should be broad, but shouldn't be closed. So if there's ways you all want to refine it, I think I would just, the intent of publicly funded for our discussion should be, did somebody give you money to put your steel in the ground and or continue to maintain it over time? And that would therefore definitely put you in our highest tier of enforcement. But I will welcome everyone to fix that definition over the next week or two. Thank you, Scott. All right. So those are subcategories. All right, so I'm going to jump, with those in mind, I'm going to jump back down to enforcement. So where we left off, Scott, Paul is definitely financial penalties for all. Scott, I think you in the long run kind of trend there. I think there's some nuances to what you're saying. You definitely support a tiered slow roll approach, but feels like you're in that area, but I will let you massage that over time if necessary. Let's see. The PFC is more of a fan of options 2 or 3. The industry is a fan would support more option 3. Both the comptroller and MDOT and MDA have all deferred at this point. I know Senator Heddleman, it looks like you did join, but I also don't want to put you on the spot. So if you want to be in the deference camp, you can. I was about to propose a follow-up here, but if you want to weigh in or if there's thoughts you have for the group right now, I'd love to hear them.
I'm going to defer. I'm in my car and jumped in the middle here. I mean, I know what you're talking about, but I'd like a little more time.
Yep, thanks. Understood. Thanks. And then Diego, I forgot also you've just jumped on. Have you had an opportunity to absorb where we've been with this discussion on financial penalties?
Yes, I've been reading through that, and I can I can give some more comments in a bit though. But yes.
All right. So are you able to provide thoughts on options 1 through 3 today, or is that something that you need to take? You're still waiting for your team to give feedback on?
Yeah, still waiting on the team to give feedback on, but yeah, I've read through it so far, but yeah, give me at least till Friday here.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so we can keep moving on. I'm going to put a pin in this one for the rest of the day. I think it's really a question of to help us kind of pull this report over the finish line. This is definitely one of the marquee discussions that will need to happen. As I said before, if we reach agreement, great. If we don't, I think that is also useful information for whichever member of the legislature might pick this report up and use it to help craft what they would like to do. So I don't, it's going to be obviously optimal if we can work towards a consensus, but it's good to make sure we have left notes. Yeah, we've inspected all the problems. Based off of where members are, since there's so many deferrals, I don't know that we can narrow this down, but I will try to incorporate what I have received from you all in terms of trying to refine these to make them more final proposals. So I think where we're at is publicly funded, which is basically receives financial compensation from the government or a utility source to install the charger, should be under the financial penalties. The question is for the other subcategories, which is really the public, the semi, however we just defined it, but that'd be the semi-public grouping, and everyone else, should they fall under this framework, yes or no, or completely private. I should have wrote that down up there. I'll add that, but completely private. Where should they fall in one of these three hierarchies? All right. So with that, I'm going to jump. Give me 1 minute. I'm going to see if. I'm going to jump into the Excel document, but before I do that, Diego, with MEA, I checked with all the other state agencies on where they are with their funding with the funding question about if the legislature tasked you with enforcing uptime and reliability standards for all publicly facing EVSE in the state, what would your budget to them be? All the state agencies said they still needed more time, and that was part of also why they wanted to dive into these the discussions we just had to help solidify that. Is MEA still working on language? Is there any questions you need answered to help get that over the finish line? We kind of need to have a solid draft number, maybe not a final, but a solid draft within a week or two, probably 2 weeks.
Yeah, we there might be some data that does come to my mind. I mean, some of it is kind of utility data that we would still like to see of how many stations, kind of telematic data. But I mean, we can kind of come up with estimates. So we are still working on some bare estimates there, but there's still some things that are high unknowns if we were to be tasked with it. So we will put that in there.
All right, if you need to talk to me about that data, or you just want to send an email to the group to see who might have it, please do. Let's just loop us in on what we can do to help.
Hey Ben, this is Amanda. Do you have any indication of how granular data of a budget breakdown you would want for this?
I think it's going to be high level. Maybe if you could make it per station or something, I don't know how. There's so many moving parts to this, and it's going to be, I think, heavily dependent upon how broad this comes down in terms of who's reporting. I think that will be, and also in terms of is if how deep enforcement goes. So I would say I told my group go worst case, and then we can whittle that back. Are you asking, when you say granularity, are you thinking like I need X number of economists versus I need X number of field technicians?
Yeah, I was
Can
thinking
you just,
about staff level, like, okay, should we return a budget estimate that also goes into like, okay, we think we need X amount of staff members and I don't know, I guess the roles they would be playing and any like administrative oversight, etc.
I would say I don't know that you need to get into like the exact details of what each member would be doing, but probably you would need to kind of, to justify the number, you need to be like, well, we thought we would need 10 bodies, and so using this state's pay scale, this is what we thought those 10 bodies represented, and we assumed $50,000 per truck or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think I'd go like, once again, this is going to be high level. Frankly, if you get if somebody gets tasked with this in the next legislative session, that the budget you give in then is going to be the official one. But I think it would be good to give a good ballpark, and we can caveat around the edges as to what it looks like. So high, it doesn't need to be like into the weeds, but detailed enough to kind of understand where you got the number.
Got it. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, don't just
And
tell me a half million. Go ahead.
if I were you, I'd put in a contingency line item to be determined just because of the unknowables that are out there right now.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good idea.
All right. I'm going to hop into the Excel document. So, where are we at in here? So what I've done is, for those of you who have it open, I've reorganized it only a tad from what the previous document was. I added in a column G, which was basically my attempt at giving a straw man with one or two options in each one for you to react to. And then H contains member feedback that I've been provided in writing before, so that you can see what others have said on the issue. And I had to use a formula, so that's what the other cells were to the right. But that's basically just just an explanation of what each person has said before via writing. So similar, the goal is we're going to get through this Excel document, and we will have a proposal for each of you to take back and say yay or nay to, or here's how I would change it, so that we can solidify it for the report. And then I would say, I was talking to some of the lawyers on our side and those who have written regulations before. I think it's good if this report gives some guidance on how to, on what should happen. But I think more importantly, it's better to say should or should not the legislature give some sort of authority here to the implementing agency, because ultimately if you put too much detail in to a law, then that's going to tie their hands, and this market is moving and evolving. So I would say the proposals should really, in terms of legislation, would be more or less, should you give authority? And that's how I'm thinking about this. And then if there's additional detail about that, we could discuss it. But really, that's something I would probably say ultimately the implementing agency would have a rulemaking to decide the exact details of that issue. Would be my thoughts for the group. Before we dive into these, I think those would be the two. Should we give authority, and then what detail would you want to discuss? But maybe that's not legislation. Is everyone okay with that approach? Kind of realign where we've been in these discussions. All right. So,
Ben, can I just
go ahead, Senator.
Yes. Sorry. And to make it clear which agency feels like it has jurisdiction over which point, right? I think is that implicit in what you were saying?
I think, yeah, but here's maybe a good way to put it. We're going to, at the next meeting, have to put our foot down on which agency should definitely do this work. That's part of why I'm trying to get everyone to finish their budgets up. Gotcha. But regardless of which agency is in charge, you still need to tell, let's say you wanted us, the PFC, to when I oversee uptime and reliability, that's a technical discussion, but there's also things within that, like there's a number of issues in here that I would call consumer benefits and or protections that are unrelated to uptime, such as labeling. So you might want to say, the question is, should the work group recommend to the legislature that labeling issue should be, they should be enabled to address that labeling issue when they run a rulemaking. That's, or do we not say anything at all and we just say, yeah, that they don't need that. That's something for the market to figure out. That's not for the agency to govern, I guess. Does that help? You're on mute if you're speaking, but I will assume yes.
Sorry. Yeah, it does help, but there are, I mean, some bigger things that I want agency representatives to be clear about whether they, you know, they claim it as their jurisdiction. That's what would be helpful to me. I mean, some of this is obvious because in our discussions over the past number of weeks, but there may be some that are not.
Got it. All right. Yeah, we will make sure. Basically, we need to make sure that it is explicit as whose jurisdiction it is under, and that if we want this to happen, that the implementing agency needs to do it. I think you and me agree, but I will double check with you, Matt.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right. So running through this, we'll start at the top, work our way to the bottom. We've discussed this last time, so the first couple should be pretty quick. Establish different payment options for the retail use of EVSEs. This is discussion of credit card, mobile phone, telephone numbers, options for customers with disability and non-English speaking. Those two, we generally said last time the group should follow NEVI. So I guess the question is, members, do you think that the legislature should give authority to the implementing agency to establish those standards in general? I know the PSC generally said fine as so long as they consult NEVI. Is there any opposition to that idea, which is basically what is here? Matt, go ahead.
Just a quick question. So when you say consult NEVI, I mean, if we recommend that the agencies should follow the NEVI standards, does it need to be more prescriptive than simply say consults?
I just realized I was talking on mute the whole time. I'm sorry, Matt. I think it would go, I think I'd make it a little broader and say, here's a list of sources that they should consider consulting, because I think you've also flagged a couple important things. But the goal would be that they are paying attention to standards throughout the industry and trying to align with those to the extent appropriate. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yeah, it does. And I guess, specifically, I was thinking about the credit card reader issue, which has been a challenge in other states, but NEVI is pretty clear on that. So thank you.
Mike, did I appropriately capture what you and I discussed earlier?
I think so. I think the less said here, the better on the state having something in the statute on the payment method other than being very general about it. In that I always think that things like that change very, very rapidly, and the more prescriptive you are, the harder it is to stay competitive with other states.
Thank you, Mike. So Olivia with ABB, I think that's a good note. So you would say, give me 1 second. Sorry. Consistent with NEVI Federal Highway other national standards. Legislative authority, implementing agency should strive to be consistent with NEVI and other national standards. All right, that will be the proposal for everyone to take back. All right, moving on. Prohibit EVC or service provider from requiring a subscription or membership to initiate a charge. So basically, you can't have a Costco EVSE charging. But also, I think there's plenty of other models where that might be a problem right now. Is there any opposition to giving authority to limit that from the legislature that would align with NEVI standards? Right. You have legislative authority. Implementing agencies should try to be consistent with NEVI, other national standards. Authorize an EV service provider to offer, that's the same thing. That's just the other side of the coin. So basically, can't prohibit somebody from using it, but you can have a membership. All right, this next one is the transparent real-time availability of certain information. We discussed this last time. I think we landed on we would not be requiring real-time availability of this information, but there was some as it was not really an implementable issue at this time. Paul, I can note that this would be an ideal outcome at a later date or something, but there's technical problems there at this time.
Okay. Again, I'm looking at the consumer who expects something to be up and you don't have the information up there.
I agree. I actually have had some conversations with folks in departments about this, and I think that would be a goal towards which we are striving.
We'll put drives explicitly in on this one. Okay, so I've captured that. All right, next one. Enable users who have subscription or memberships with an EV to use an EV station that is not part of their membership. I said revisit after members have had a chance to look at the law listed by Blink. So Matt, this has to do with roaming. I guess if the state says that you can't obligate somebody to have a membership to use your station, is this a necessary? I think that this is duplicative and unnecessary if the state's already saying, but I also could be missing something. So I know you're close to this issue or closer. So is this duplicative after we say you can't obligate a membership on somebody to use your station?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to get feedback from other members here. But my understanding is that if, say, California is going to require companies to enter networks into roaming agreements, regardless of the mechanism of how that's done, if it's sort of peer-to-peer bilateral agreements or via roaming hub, that if that goes forward in California, it's going to be kind of a company-to-company agreement that will have applicability, I would assume nationally, if not beyond. And so it will kind of address the roaming issue, I think, in this regard.
I think the roaming issue has come up because you have to get registered with a certain network to use a certain charger. And So you have 5 different cards, and that then becomes a real problem. I mean, to give you an example, the Shell Recharge at the Columbia Mall, I had trouble using that, but I was able to use the roaming section of ChargePoint in order to initiate a charge. There's no national app out there right now that will allow you to roam in between any and all chargers. I mean, this is a real big issue.
Yeah, I mean, roaming is a market response to it to help the customer experience, and so it's enabled but not required. So if we say enable users, that's pretty broad. That's allows for roaming. Um, I mean, I don't think it should be required necessarily, but the market is kind of creating roaming services. So I think we should just leave it at that.
Okay, before I move on, though, maybe this might, for my own edification, I think. We have a statement up above that says that we would follow NEVI standards for these chargers that would not require a subscription to initiate a charge at a station. So I should be able to show up to any station and start charging my vehicle. Is this a secondary concern, or is that that the implementing agency needs to consider when they're dealing with that first point, in which case I do need them to look at it? Or is this issue moot because is the roaming agreement issue moot because I've already said anyone who shows up to a charging station should be allowed to use it, regardless of their membership with the station?
Well, anyone showing up to the station should be allowed to use it by virtue of being able to use a credit card. I think that's what that language was drawn to. So I should be able to show up and use the station by virtue of my membership with another network provider. So I think that's 2 separate things.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with that as well.
Okay, so then we will do something in this category, and I will just need to wrap my head around that a little more for the write-up. Michael.
Thanks, Ben.
You should also consider it to be conditional, although we said we weren't going to allow that membership section previously. If the General Assembly disagrees, the response to this could be conditional, that if something's allowed, then this should be a further condition.
Okay. I will work on drafting up that and circulate it for you all to say yes or no to. Michael, just last clarification point before I move on.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Michael Krauthammer, representing the Alliance for Transportation Electrification. So roaming is an issue that has been front of mind for like a decade now. And a reference from a few minutes ago sort of tipped the hand to the age of this issue, namely having a lot of cards in your wallet or on your keychain. We don't even carry, many of us don't even carry wallets or keychains anymore, let alone key fobs and RFID cards. This is really, it was an issue a long time ago, but it's really gone away because there are now so many ways of accessing chargers. And the idea of roaming, even if you think about the old days of cards, you can't go into a Walgreens and present your CVS card and get the discount. You need the card from each. You need a membership with each, or you just pay cash with each. And the analogy works the same way with EV charging. Like Scott said a second ago, you can always just walk up and use a credit card, QR code, app, whatever to initiate a session. You don't need to have a membership at all. But to require networks to recognize other companies' credentials is an extraordinarily complicated requirement, both financially and logistically. It begs many, many questions of like who has to have a relationship with whom? Do you have to have a relationship with everyone who holds themselves out as an EV charging network? Only other networks that have chargers in Maryland? Only chargers that have level 2 or DC fast? Only chargers that have public chargers? Only companies that have a certain number of chargers in Maryland? Only companies that have a certain number of chargers in the US, North America, Europe, Singapore? I mean, the list goes on. I've done a lot of work in this specific area. It's exceptionally complicated, and as much as we'd like to remove as many obstacles as possible, I believe that the obstacle has been removed by having like 15 different ways of initiating a charging session to require two companies who are literally competitors with each other to get together and facilitate transactions like you're describing here is not, it's A, not going to solve the problem, and B, serve as another disincentive to coming to Maryland at all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
This is Paul Verchinsky. I would agree with you if I could stand up and go right to an EVSE and tap my credit card and initiate a charge. We're not there. And that's the end of my comment.
All right, I'm going to move us on from this one. I'm going to put in there as, since now we've kind of beat around it for a little bit, the agency. I'm going to put in what California has so you can all see what they're doing. And then you can decide if it's something that you all want to say yes or no to. Otherwise, it would be probably using what Scott has listed, which is not sure how we would enforce, but we can encourage a fix. So I guess that one we will readdress at the next meeting. All right, establish employee training certificates. The three options are give implementing agency of the authority and require them to consider what NEVI has. The implementing agency doesn't take any action and defers to the Weights and Measures Registered Service Agency program, which does not cover all these items, but those individuals are able to work on stations, or the implementing agency has no requirement. So for what is this, employee training or certification? I think where most members are at is just aligned with NEVI. Once again, though, this is a consumer protection. Go ahead, Amanda.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Is the Registered Service Agency program, does that cover, I might have missed this in the last one, does that cover those installing, or that's just those inspecting?
This would be installation. So inspection actually would be carried out by inspectors, not registered service agencies. So the Registered Service Agency program will be uniformly run as it currently is through other metering devices and weighing devices throughout the state of Maryland, and other states have similar programs. So service agencies will be required to register with us and then register their individual technicians. Technicians will be required to pass the National Council on Weights and Measures testing. that will be available later this year. Once they pass, they will be granted certification within the state of Maryland to install and place these devices into service, as well as repair and return these devices into service after they've been removed by a weights and measures official, or if they're called out by the place of business to conduct repair work.
Okay, thank you.
Amanda, anything else?
Not at this time. I want to take in that information that was just given.
All right. Again, while the members think about it, I can say the PSC talked. We aren't. If I'm thinking about things that are coming out of here, so Weights and Measures has its registered service agency program, which it's going to do. On this side, we're now talking about uptime and reliability standards, and I would say additional customer protection. So this would be a third arm possibly, which would be, am I also going to require those that work on this equipment to have specifics training? And I think we were not convinced yet that we needed to do that. But that was where we were at. Happy to hear from members. Scott.
Yeah, I had a question. So this installation maintenance is going to be done probably 99% by licensed electricians. So would they be grandfathered in somehow, or would they have to take additional training? Because by virtue of having a license, being a licensed electrician, you would think that they already have most of the training.
I think this would add well, Weights and Measures is would require additional training for theirs. That's for the installation, as we just heard. This requirement that we are talking about is now, I guess, thinking about those who are fixing it or doing additional work on it later. And are we going to require that person to be trained further past being a certified electrician?
I think you would have to have that because these stations are dependent on being networked. And that's typically not an item that an electrician would get involved in. It's software.
So if I'm
and the EVITP program, that is supposed to supply EVSE specific training for licensed electricians also.
Right, and that's the one that everyone's referring to if we go this route.
Yeah.
So for the work group, is there one direction or another on this? Michael, I can give you like 30 seconds.
Look, we support worker training and knowledgeable folks to be installing chargers. However, we believe that it should be voluntary. It should be a trait that installers compete on by signaling their training and certifications to their customers. We do not believe that it should be required. If it's required, we believe that it's going to result in higher prices, higher costs for installation, and ultimately less EV charger installation in the state. Thank you.
Go ahead, Josh.
Thanks. So a couple thoughts, and if you'll bear with me as I try and verbally think out loud in a coherent way. I think we're kind of talking about two separate buckets here. One is the installation, and then one is the maintenance. And even though they're related, they are two separate things. And so, for example, Charger Help, which is a company that a lot of folks are familiar with and partners with utilities and charging companies and does work in Maryland. They're they're a maintenance company as opposed to hiring an electrical contractor that has EVITP certification, for example. So I think as we consider that, we should think about those two things separately in terms of what the right approach may be. And maybe we take the same approach, but I just want to flag that. The other thing is I would encourage having a more performance-based outcome approach than being overly prescriptive in terms of the requirements for who does what, similar to what Michael said. And I know, given the context of this whole conversation about we need to ensure more reliable uptime, et cetera, like, and all of us share some frustration about the collective state of the industry in that sense. I think it's also worth just taking a step back and seeing like where we are with these new funding rounds and new chargers that are going to be deployed. Like I would bet that all these, upcoming NEVI funded chargers, any future PSC approved chargers that have O&M built into it, et cetera, I mean, they're going to achieve much higher levels of uptime than a lot of the chargers that we're talking about in Maryland today that were installed over the past several years without adequate uptime contracts and requirements. So I do think as a work group, we should focus on the outcomes and give the market, which is still very nascent, even just in this installation and in the maintenance areas, give the market time to evolve, to stand up some of these programs, even if that's the direction that the market ends up going in or the industry ends up going in. And so, and the RSA thing, even though I hear what MDA is saying, that RSA is an established requirement and is applied in a number of different areas outside of EV charging, within the EV charging industry, and we touched on this a bit during the last meeting, it's a big question mark in my mind, and I'm really concerned that it would just like to fully implement RSA requirements, as we talked about at the last meeting. I'm not going to belabor it. Could really be problematic and hinder just a lot of investment and in getting charging stations out there. And so, with the RSA piece, I would encourage like trying to get data, fact finding, like revisiting it, as opposed to coming back to the legislature with a recommendation that we impose RSA requirements, like, or we finalize these RSA requirements next year. So, thanks.
Thanks, Josh. I should say I had not intended to address RSAs in terms of weights and measures unless this group wanted to. I think weights and measures is already going there. But I think this is a question of, does that or EVITP extend to the implementing agency that's discussing uptime and reliability standards? So I guess it's on the maintenance side.
I gotcha. I was seeing the maintenance.
If the group wants to include a note that there's a concern there that should be explored, we could do that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was seeing the maintenance, and I was thinking about times where there would be maintenance on the meters or things like that. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So basically, Josh, I think what you're trying to say is you would not be in support of having a required maintenance certification right now for EVSE electricians. Do I have that right? But you would revisit that in the future.
Correct.
All right.
And
okay,
and electricians might not even be the tradesman that actually goes out there, right?
Right. And then Paul, you are in favor of it. Scott, were you in favor?
I'm kind of in the middle. I think the market it'll be like a value add to a licensed electrician. So I think the market will take care of it. So I would not require it. basically. I mean, I'm looking at the EVITP, and that's they're trying to provide that value add to the electrician services.
All right. So I have you down for that. I have Josh down for that. I'm just going to run through the list. Matt with Blink.
I mean, I guess I would say we would like to see more pathways beyond just EVITP. We recognize that is one way to go forward, but even NEVI, offers these alternative pathways too. So we would support a little broader approach.
All right. Let's see. Running down the list, we've got Allison with MDA. This is for uptime and reliability, maintenance, training standards.
We would not have any part in uptime, reliability with RSA, registration of registered service agencies and technicians. Our particular registered service agency program covers the initial placing of devices into service. So an electrician can install them, however, they cannot place them into service. A business owner can, or a registered service agency can, but an electrician cannot. Ideally, they would have the information available to them of MDA requirements. That way, the devices that they are installing would not be in violation immediately. But no, we would not. A registered service agency program would not cover uptime. It would only cover what MDA currently requires, such as placing devices into initial service, repairing and returning devices that have been removed from service.
All right. Thank you. So I'm going to assume then you don't. Okay. And then let's go to MEA.
Yeah, we don't have we don't have a position at the agency per se. I also have kind of my own personal opinions, of course, but the agency does not right now.
All right. Your personal opinion? Okay.
I always think that,
Sorry.
I like the comments of the market kind of moving in one direction, of course, but that was a great comment.
All right. Yeah. This has been discussed now with our leadership amongst myself and other members. We generally, those members are not members of those on the staff I have talked to were generally more in favor of letting the market do what it needed to do here and not having that as a requirement. Senator Hettleman, did you have a position?
I'm going to defer on this.
Okay, thanks. All right, Paul.
Yeah, I heard what I think it was EV Go saying, or Blink, I forget which one. I think I would put in or equivalent training because this is an area that is a real big issue in the maintenance area, I believe, right now. And that would allow over time for the market to work, but at least would require some initial standards. So that's where I would go in modifying my initial comment.
Okay. I've got it in there as if there was a standard, it would be looking at EVIT or something equivalent. So considered NEVI or something equivalent. So for now, the straw man sent back to all you will be that this is not something that we would advise taking up at this time, but I can note the options. All right, we have 5 minutes till 3. As I said, we had the option to extend an hour, but that's only if members wanted to extend. There's still material to cover that I would support extending. But I will run down the list to see if members are willing to stay on. To finish this out, I think we can do it within a half hour, but that's only if the group is willing to do it. So give me 1 second to pull up my member sheet. All right, going Let me stop presenting, sorry. Top to bottom, Matt Chen with Blink. Continue?
Yes. Yes, continue.
Josh.
Sorry, continue.
Paul, continue.
Continue.
Scott.
Yeah, continue.
Diego, can you continue?
Continue.
Amanda,
Continue.
M, or somebody from the comptroller's office?
Yep, Kim is back. Continue, thanks.
Yeah. I'm in favor of continuing. Allison with MDA.
I can continue.
Thank you. And then Senator Hettleman, are you okay to continue?
Yeah, I can for a half hour.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, let's see if we can knock this out, team. Making good progress. All right. So the next one is requires, oh no, sorry. All right, after that we had established minimum power output for EVSE and EVSE equipment and charging stations. So this would be DC fast charging needs to operate under, things installed have to operate under certain standards. NEVI requires a continuous output of 150 kilowatts and requires certain voltages. AC level 2 has to deliver at least 6 kilowatts. The proposals I put in front of the group are, well, I guess there should be three. One, NEVI has its standards, and since we're supposed to defer to NEVI unless there's good cause, NEVI, so it's not listed, but NEVI would be one of the options. The next would be, Weights and Measures has a minimum standard in terms of a little bit of output that has to come out, but it's nowhere close to the standards that are listed. Or what I have recommended is a third option is don't have a minimum output standard as technology is changing and there are different vintages of equipment. Instead, for any sort of uptime requirements, the goal is that the station is operating as designed and what was registered with the implementing agency. So basically, not having the implementing agency try and regulate what the minimum output is for EVSE equipment, instead focus on did it work as designed.
Ben, do you mind screen sharing again?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. My
Thanks.
apologies. So for those of you following along on the Excel sheet, I'm on row 19.
Yeah, I'm fine with your third option. I'm a little nervous about requiring percentages and power levels. I think that would change over time. So.
Okay. Paul, your hand's up.
Yeah, I would go with the as designed too.
Okay. Other members, anyone opposed? Go ahead, Diego.
Is there an actual standard though? I'm just thinking of future proofing and like vehicle to grid. I know level 2 stations and level 3 can be enabled. Is there a standard going into the future of what we're going to want to see so that these stations are connected? Or, I mean, is that going to be an issue going into the future? Is that something that we want to discuss in this particular case? And what level that kind of dictates, or what that would mean?
I guess I will turn it around to I do not have an answer there. I guess industry folks who have been engaged throughout the country, especially at the federal level, other than NEVI, is there any discussions around minimum output and voltages and stuff for EVSE that would be helpful for going forward? That, like, is there certain federal agencies that are working on this? Is this all AEEE standards? Is this a discussion? Is this a concern?
I think that's best left to the interconnection group that's working on Drive. I mean, that's I think it's beyond the scope of what we're doing here.
I tend to agree, but I just want to check to answer Diego's questions. Go ahead,
Michael here. I've never heard of, I can't recall hearing of a discussion where any state imposed a requirement for a specific power level other than NEVI.
Yeah, this is Josh. Agreed. Where I have seen it is in specific procurements or grants, but not just as a general rule.
All right.
And just to add a little bit of background onto that, there could be power sharing configurations where the amount of power coming out of a particular charger may change over time. So there's lots of reasons. I do agree with Josh also that, of course, with certain procurements, of course, there may be specifications, but not broadly speaking. Of course, this is Handbook 44. Requirements require that the EVSE display the power level, and so that the purpose of that is to inform the driver as to what the power level is that they're going to be receiving.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Diego. And thank you to all of you who gave answers. All right. Anyone oppose the idea that there's not a standard, that the implementing agency doesn't need to set a standard? Instead, the concern is that the stations are working as designed. All right. On. All right, so the next one is about submitting reports. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time here because I think it really comes down to the implementing agency. I guess I would want to ensure any reports that are made are going to the agency that is giving out information. So the implementing agency, if we do uptime reliability standards, they obviously need it to track the uptime reliability. Comptroller's office, you were listed under here. What would you need? I'm assuming you just need the usage data to be able to do your job and who to send the bill to.
I'm sorry. Is that for the comptroller's office?
Yes, comptroller's office. What information do you need from EVSCs from a reporting perspective in general?
I'm going to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. That I think I would need to ask my colleague who's not on today.
Okay.
So can you set, I'll get back to you on that. Sorry.
All right, sounds good. So I guess the straw man proposal is the implementing agency developing the reporting requirements should definitely receive the report. And then if any of the other state agencies want to weigh in on what you think you need for reporting, we would list that in the report, but I'm not sure that we need to include anything else. But I will defer to the members here. There's also this discussion regarding the alternative fuels data center and making sure they get data. And I don't think that if for anyone subject to the framework where we are requiring reporting, doesn't seem overly broad, but I will defer to the members. Senator Hettleman, if you wanted to weigh in on what you were hoping with the reporting requirement, would love to hear that too. Right. Does anyone have any opposition to the idea that the only one getting a report is the implementing agency, and any other state agency in the next 2 weeks that raises their hand and says they need reports? That will be the proposal then, and then everyone can react to it. All right. Draft proposal for the next one: establish labeling requirements for EV charging stations, rates, capacity, and voltages. This is what is required already today of weights and measures. So for group decision, the choices are the implementing agency determines additional information that would need to be disclosed at the charging station above the minimum required by weights and measures. And I guess, so that would be or we wouldn't give the implementing agency authority over labeling requirements because weights and measures is already handling the basics. So I'll stop there. Those are your two options, unless you want to make a third. versus row 24. Amanda with MDOT, I want to pick on you, just get some conversation going. You have a thought?
I mean, I think at minimum what weight to measure requires is fine. I don't really know if I have thoughts on additional labeled information.
Okay. Anyone else? I'm okay with sticking with the minimum unless anyone thinks of something else over the next couple of weeks. So we won't, the group would just recommend MDA sticks with their, or the labeling requirements required of MDA are okay for now. Unless somebody thinks of something in the next couple of weeks. All right. Now into the 97% uptime. So I was trying to think through when we're saying to the implementing agency, you have authority to determine uptime requirements for these stations, but we need to tell them what that means. So my proposal to the group is I think there's like 5 items in here that kind of influence what that 97% uptime may or may not look like. But I think the important thing is that we give the implementing agency the guidance to do it and the flexibility to pivot as needed in response to other national standards, which is similar to what was put forward in House Bill 834 for utility stations. So what I did is I took the language, what you see here is the language directly from House Bill 834, so we modify it to be for the charging stations under this framework. But basically, it says that the company operating the charging station or network shall have an average annual uptime of 97% or greater in accordance with either the NEVI standards or other standards that were established by the commission. And so basically the whole purpose of that other was if it was determined for the utility there was a problem, but your guidance was to stick with NEVI unless there was good reason otherwise. And that would be the statement that would be given to the group or to the implementing agency. And then the rest of these items, which is specify how uptime will be measured, whether it should do it at the port level or the connector level, whether the downtime is backdated, whether the downtime includes broken interfaces and possible exemptions. That would be something left for the implementing agency. But what I would do in the report is describe what the PSC did when implementing HB 834. And I can also have MDOT write up what they are doing for their standards and then say, these are general guidances for the implementing agency to consider when determining how to do theirs. And we also stress it's important to follow NEVI or the national standards just because a lot of the EVSE providers will be looking at those national standards to design their equipment. So deviation is not recommended unless there's good cause. Stop there. That's kind of my general proposed approach for this 97% time in the report. Feedback, thoughts, questions?
I've got a, this is Scott Wilson. I've got a kind of preliminary model I'm working out in my head about how this would all work. And what I would do is I could make basically a decision tree and I could get that back to you, Ben, so that we could like be a framework kind of, because I've got ideas about like the providers would, I mean, it all comes down under NEVI, it's the outage time minus the excluded time. So the provider's going to report an outage time, and then they're going to report an excluded time. And if it was excluded, it would, I mean, I think it should be documented. And then But then there's this idea of, okay, well, the outage time starts from when and goes until when. And so I'm still kind of forming that model right now in my head, but I think I've kind of got it worked out.
Yeah, feel free to send it to me. I can, especially if you can get it to me the next day or two, probably let's say by
Yeah.
I'll need to take a day or two to format what I'm going to give back to the group. If you want to
Yeah,
get that to me, I can make sure that they see what you're talking about. I will say, food for your thought when you're giving me the proposal is we want to make, I guess this is kind of getting back to my initial statement about there's two parts to the report, or there's two parts to probably the recommendation. One is this is the kind of guidance to give the implementing agency, basically empowering them. And then, we can, if we want to give any additional feedback on how they do it. And so for your framework outline, think through, is this something that while the agency is standing up, this is something that they can think about using versus is this something that you are saying you want specified in the legislation? And then just maybe highlight or just indicate to me when you send it to me what part is which.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So like the agency role and the legislative role.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, sure.
Thanks. Other feedback at this time, thoughts, edits? Okay. Happy to revisit. I guess. Yeah. All right, establish customer support requirements. So this is labeling requirements for how to contact if there is an issue with the EVSE, minimum hours of operations, general customer service needs, and providing or dispatching customer assistance. So basically this is all about, I'm a customer, I have a complaint and something isn't working. How do I get a hold of you and how do we make sure that it's getting fixed? Draft proposal for the group, and then we can edit from here. Other than requiring EVSCs be labeled with how to contact customer service and the appropriate hours of operations, is there anything else that the implementing agency needs to dictate to the EVSC community on this? Basically, I guess if I run down the list, do you think it's appropriate for the implementing agency to dictate the minimum number of hours that it works, or the minimum number of hours that their customer service needs to be available, and how quickly they dispatch? Or is the minimum requirement there needs to be a contact for the customer to get a hold of for fixing the station, and that you need to provide the hours by which they can be contacted? So simply just making a requirement of disclosures versus dictating how the disclosures will work. My straw man is basically say, give the information, but don't dictate. But if somebody wants to go in the opposite, raise your hand and let me know. Going on, minimum, the row 36 for those of you following along on your own Excel sheet. Establish minimum hours of operations for EVSEs. Basically, do we require minimum hours of operations, or do we leave this as a business decision for the company? But we do require disclosure. I guess I would put out. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I would require disclosure. I mean, if it's private and it's being used by the public, they should know what hours of operation. I mean, it's kind of like a gas station. Some of them aren't not open 24 hours. But I would think that the other disclosure is if they're getting financial incentives, then whatever that agreement is, that's what rules.
This is Amanda from MDOT. I would agree with that.
Okay, I'm fine with that as well. Apologies for myself. Require proactive monitoring of EVSE and EV charging equipment. I had a note in here. Senator Heddleman, for the proactive monitoring of the EVSE equipment, were you thinking that that was something as a group we would discuss from the perspective of the state or the perspective of the business owner or both?
Probably the state.
Okay, that's what
Because,
we also thought on our side, but I wanted to check with you before I dove in.
yeah, no, I think the state, but assuming it's not compliant, then obviously communication with the business owner.
Okay. Okay, so basically, members, the implementing agency, proactive monitoring instead of reactive monitoring of EVSE equipment. This means you probably have a set schedule where the state agency is going around and checking the equipment on a cadence, and if they're getting any sort of complaints, they might escalate their checking of said equipment. Obviously, that's for the implementing agency, but basically, the implementing agency is being proactive instead of reactive to seeing if things are not working as designed. Any
I think that's
opposition to
right.
that?
Yeah, I
Go
mean, I
ahead.
think there should be a regularly scheduled compliance check and being responsive to complaints.
Sounds good. Anyone have concerns with that? Allison, go ahead.
So our agency would be actively involved in the investigation of consumer complaints, as we are with other devices that are registered with our department. Typically, we respond to consumer complaints either the day that we receive them, but at latest within 72 hours, depending upon what day of the week the complaint is received. And we do update the consumers that file the complaint with our findings. So that is one area. The only other area within weights and measures is currently we do not have specified timelines for regular inspection activities due to staffing restrictions. But I definitely agree with consumer complaints.
Question for Ag on that. In regs, or is that in statute?
For consumer complaint investigation or for the time parameters for inspection of devices?
For your turnaround time? Both.
So I do not think that there's specified turnaround time in statute or in regs. However, that's what's outlined within our work plan within our program. They're our top priority to investigate consumer complaints.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Matt.
So I think from the kind of weights and measures accuracy perspective, we would definitely support, the reporting of stations that are out of service or not working as expected. I think for us to consider something within the reliability framework, that would be a bit dependent on, again, which kind of level of applicability is ultimately recommended.
I'm sorry, say that last half again from the uptime
Sure.
reliability.
I think in terms of monitoring, we would need to know what subset of stations would be regulated for reliability before we know if we could, recommend proactive monitoring of those stations.
Okay. Is that because of the scope of it? Because you have a certain grouping that you're concerned about that coming to versus another group you're not concerned about it coming to?
Basically, yes.
Okay. All right. I do think we need to do some proactive monitoring in this area. I don't know that it obviously, it'll be eye in the side of the beholder in terms of how strict it would be. But if you're going to have to enforce something, you should be checking it every so often. So we discussed maybe the scope of that, but yeah. And so Matt, I'm happy to revisit this at the next meeting when we go back through the enforcement discussion, because basically you're saying resolve enforcement and then come back to this.
Correct. And again, I think some of the business model frameworks that we previously discussed come into play a little bit.
Okay. Paul.
Yeah, Allison's comment kind of bothers me that, we attempt to resolve all complaints within no more than 72 hours, but we don't have a regulatory or legal basis for doing that. I think that's a recommendation we should make, because if we're saying this is going to be complaint driven, then we need to make sure that MDA has the authority to do it and to, if needed, put penalties in place. Otherwise, it's not something that can be utilized. And I think it would be difficult for MDA in working up their budget to say, okay, we need X number of people because we need to get this done within 72 hours, but they don't have a statutory authority for it.
We need to hit a couple other things. So Allison, I'll let you respond. I will circle this back to the group next meeting since we've hit most of the topics. So go ahead, you have the last word on this one.
All right, thank you. I just want to say that even though there's not a time parameter specified in statute, we do oversee the investigation of consumer complaints relating to the devices that we do regulate, register, and oversee. And a lot of times they're not completely resolved within 72 hours. We just respond and investigate. So it's just dependent upon what we find. When we arrive at the particular facility, if we find that the complaint is not validated, then yes, we'll contact and let the consumer know and close out our report. If for some reason the device and in question, the complaint is validated, then enforcement action is taken. And then follow-up action is taken, and the consumer is notified with every action along the way until this particular problem has been resolved. But we do ensure that the device can no longer be used if a complaint is validated. So it's removed from service. It's condemned for repair until it's properly repaired and returned to service. But investigation of consumer complaints is currently stated within state statute under part of our program's responsibilities. We just take it a little bit further within our department and ensure that someone responds either that day, which is 90% of our complaints are responded to that day. However, if we receive a complaint, say at 4 p.m. on a Friday, and our inspection staff is all required to be home by 4:30 due to the MOU agreement, then they would not respond until that following Monday, or if there's a holiday. They would be the only instances when we would not respond immediately to a consumer complaint. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Might ask you to just send that relevant statute so I can cite it for the members. All right, the last couple items: establish standards for procedures and basically standards and accurate field standards for Handbook 44. Weights and Measures is already handling this. I don't think we as a group need to recommend anything against or for what they're doing there. We would just leave that to MDA to handle any issues with that. All right. Then
Ben,
the next,
Ben,
go ahead.
Yeah, this is Josh. And this may have been covered previously, but in terms of MDA's kind of process to determine how it will implement and enforce that, is that going to be some sort of rulemaking process where there'll be an opportunity for input, et cetera? I'm curious how that will be handled.
Allison, are you all running a rulemaking for how you're going to enforce Handbook 44? And is that a process that the EVSEs can provide feedback into?
So currently our plans is to follow our current program outline for the enforcement of these devices. So we would use Handbook 44 for specifications, such as, say, the charging port. Is it able to actually charge the vehicle? Can you read the display with all the information that's required? Are marking requirements met? Does it have NTEP certification? So that would be specifications. Then, of course, the tolerance values are outlined in Handbook 44 as well as user requirements. So all of that is already laid out in Handbook 44. Currently, the way our program works is we go out, we inspect devices on routine or complaint basis, depending upon if we receive a complaint. Obviously, we go out and investigate. If it's routine, then we conduct a routine inspection. And we take action if there is a violation noted. So, but we don't immediately fine. MTA is not a department that's first step is to initiate a fine. Fines are only given when there's absolutely no corrective action taken over multiple times, and you can see clear, concise fraud, which is not, it doesn't happen very often. But MDA already has a fine structure set up within statute, as well as the way the parameters of the program run. The device owner would be required to either remove the device from service or repair the device and place it back into service. These devices cannot just sit inactive for months at a time and not be repaired properly. Just like if it's removed from service, the owner of the device can't go out there and say, I'm going to remove the tag and we're just going to use it anyway, because that would be an actual violation that would be finable if they decided to make that decision. But MDA's first line is to educate and help the device owner understand what the violation is, give them the parameters, and then additionally, we will be listing registered service agencies that are able to repair these devices and place them back into service or actually install them, because I know some of these devices, it's not like a typical device that can be calibrated out in the field. So I think that's the best way I can answer that. But just keeping in mind, weights and measures is a midpoint between consumers and businesses. We're not 100% there for consumers. We're not 100% there for businesses. We're at the midpoint, ensuring equity within the marketplace.
Thanks.
Josh, does that
Yeah.
influence what you wanted to say about this proposal?
Yeah. I guess where I'm going is kind of this specific Excel row, along with kind of just the broader set of issues around field inspection enforcement. I don't know if that's something that this work group itself should focus on. I would think so, or if it's something just an offline thing or a separate conversation to have with MDA. But from the industry standpoint, or at least speaking for Switch, and maybe this is just me, Switch needs to educate itself more on the full protocol and process for what MDA is doing and what it plans to do. But I think this broader issue of making sure that the whole field inspection, enforcement, monitoring that MDA does is like strikes that right balance, right? And the RSA piece, I feel, is like one part of that conversation. And so kind of in keeping with this broader theme of this work group, whether we're talking about uptime and reliability or payment processes or whatever, I think there would be value in making sure that as the state proceeds with implementing field inspections and enforcements, that there is, whether it's a rulemaking or whether it's a more of an informal stakeholder conversation, it's a really important conversation to have. So I don't know how to, Ben, if you can like translate that into a proposed recommendation.
Yeah, here's what I want you to do. Send me a write-up of what you think, what you would like to see addressed in the report. It doesn't have to be like 3 pages, but give me something that kind of is like, this is my concern, this is what I would like to see have addressed. It would probably be good to maybe, I'm happy to facilitate a call with you and MDA and any of the other industry folks that have a concern. And if there's still things that you think would be appropriate for the report, we can bring it back to the group with probably a more fleshed out statement. Just with where we are at this point in the work group, a flushed out, like, this is what we would like to see stated, and then you can put it to a vote. Does that make sense? Like discussion and vote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Allison?
I do want to say that industry has been very active within the National Council of Weights and Measures, creating proposals, actually drafting 3.40, which is the Electric Vehicle Fueling Equipment Code in Handbook 44. We've listened, we've worked together. And even their most recent proposals that are going to go in the handbook starting January 1st of this upcoming year was drafted by industry and voted on by Weights and Measures officials around the U.S. So industry has been actively engaged with the drafting of what's currently in Handbook 44.
Okay. So yeah, because we were at the time I had promised that we would be trying to wrap up. So for this one, Josh, let's proceed with what I just recommended. Write up your concerns. If that identifies with the other members of the industry, maybe you all can kind of just review, send that in, and then we'll see about bringing that up here. But I need to hit our last thing and then move on. Does that work?
Yeah. When would you like that by?
Can you do it sometime this week?
Sure.
Awesome. Michael, can you drop it in the chat what you're hoping to state?
It's not opposition to the proposal. It's just a request that the group. I'm aware of what Allison just described, and I agree with what she said. I think it's also worth the committee here understanding that, notwithstanding the fact that the language is what it is, every state or county, such as it may be, has the ability to exercise discretion in its enforcement of those provisions. And so my request is that this committee consider whether to, my request is that this committee discuss that issue in the report and acknowledge that Maryland may choose to defer this level of inspections and enforcement until a later date, that it need not be implemented immediately.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. So yeah, I think that fits within what I've asked Josh to do. And then I'll coordinate with him offline on the development of that and bring that back to the group for decision. It makes sense. Yes, we'll make sure to touch this at least one more time as a group to decide if we're going to address it or not after we flesh it out more. All right, we are about at time. So last thing, the last of these items, because we are still discussing enforcement in another section, so we don't need to touch on civil penalties today. The established standards of use for what are considered the connectors, so CCS and North American charging stations. I view this as very similar to the previous discussion we were having about minimum output. And so I was going to recommend implementing agency does not need to establish standards that charging stations use a specific type. Simply what matters is that the charging station is operating as designed and that we keep this technology agnostic. Alternatively, the agency would develop standards for connectors and defer to NEVI. But as I was saying, I don't think this is something that the CCS and the NACS are or construction standards that would be required if you were awarded funds. So I guess anyone have an issue with simply leaving this technology agnostic and focusing on station operating as designed? All right, team. I think we have, for the most part, a draft of proposals that you all can react to and edit and modify. There's obviously still one or two there's still a couple big items that need to be addressed. I am going to edit the documents you have. I might even reorganize in a manner that I'll probably do some reorganization too. So the format you're going to get back will probably be different over the next couple of days, and then get you a document that you can review and react to for our next meeting. Where hopefully we can lock down most of this and maybe only have one or two issues outstanding. I'm also going to be starting to draft the report as well, so that we can have something to review here in the near future as well. Public comments, is there any non-members that need to state something? Okay, members, are there any questions or concerns before we hop off the call? All right, everyone, thank you for your time today. It's been really productive, and have a wonderful rest of your Monday.
Thank you, Ben.
Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.